Got your range. You think I don't understand your being crazy? Yellow biscuit, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't allow the speed on that. You know, a long time ago, being crazy meant something. Nowadays, everybody's crazy. So, I mean, synonymous. I mean, it's an irony, man. It's a pair of ducks. I mean, are you crazy?
Perhaps the most famous prisoner in the history and American culture of prison, Charles Manson, still fascinates many people till this day. Really, Manson wasn't a serial killer with his bare hands as he was with his mind. He wasn't butchering people, performing cannibalistic acts, and really, there's no real hard evidence, besides hearsay, of people that he did murder. He was simply just the spokesman of what he called his family. There's hours and hours of interviews with Manson proclaiming his gospel of radical thinking, the unordinary life of Charles Manson, living the majority of his life deep in the walls of prison. This is that story. Charlie, in no doubt, is one of the most unique and well-known criminals in American culture of crime history, spending more time incarcerated than being free in the public. Even when Charlie was a young boy, growing up to be a young man, running into trouble very early, and by his 20s, starting a very successful cult with a movement called Helter Skelter, bringing with it the most famous murders that occurred in just 1 week in August of 1969. It would span the world fast and linger for decades, making Charlie a household name. He would evade the death penalty, and what seemed like a shy little man at first to the public would become something else. Charlie's life before prison is short and still is somewhat mysterious, with many answers missing. But his life incarcerated is pictured from decade to decade through film and photos. Through the 70s and 80s, Charlie is interviewed extensively and becomes still, to this day, one of the most interviewed criminals in history. When Charlie first enters the prison system, he's mild and short-tempered, smiling, laughing, somewhat pleasant, most would say, to where he's confusing most people with his soft-spoken voice. After Charlie is convicted on January 25th, in 1971, he disappears in prison as the world moves on, but the major pop that would shoot Charlie back into the spotlight was the release of Helter Skelter book that was written about the crimes and family that Charlie had been directly involved in, and showing Charlie as public enemy number one. The book did well, and did even better when a televised movie was made of it, showing more detail of the crimes that the Manson family had committed, where they lived, how they acted, how they dressed, and glamorizing who they thought Charlie Manson was, but in no doubt making a permanent shadow over the media for the next few decades. Charlie was living his life in California prison, often calling prison his father. After the release of the book and the movie of Helter Skelter, Charlie is flooded with stalkers, women that want to marry him, people that show up, new or old, wanting to continue or be a part of Charlie's family, looking to him as a father figure. Charlie's popularity grew to an unbelievable number. It's truly a wonderful time for Charlie. He never seems to be too down about his situation. He's locked away in a top security prison in California. He's famous, he's well known. In some weird way in prison, he's feared or simply respected. But there are the ones that don't like Charlie, and he'll soon enough find out. When you listen to Charlie talk, he's absolutely perfect as a cult leader. His words flow into rants like a warm knife through butter. You can see how people, someone lost in life looking for a leader, knowing no better, would be excited to be with Charlie. But nonetheless, Charlie's words are of a person that has no need for society. From Charlie having an X on his forehead along with his followers that they all carved in. Charlie first carved the X in his forehead in the middle of his trial, saying he was Xing himself from the world. But not long into the following years, Charlie takes a sharp object and carves a swastika out of the X. He explains the meaning in his own way. People think that Charlie is a follower of Hitler and trying to keep his message going. But Charlie has his own take of it with what the swastika means to him, saying that Hitler took the swastika from its original meaning, but it only builds fear from Charlie towards the public. You have to understand, he's not like most inmates, pleading for his innocence to get out, looking for forgiveness. Charlie's not helping his image for what people think of him. He simply doesn't care what society thinks of him. Charlie, after some time, if you can say, found some little pieces of happiness in prison from how he made it sound, giving his situation. Going into the 80s, Charlie is able to work in the gardens, now able to be outside, in the sun, using his hands, and really having a healthy element in his life besides being locked up in a cell. He also is cleaning bathrooms. It may not sound like much, but it's better than rotting away in a dark room. Charlie is in no means without bad behavior in prison. Over the time he spent in prison, he would have over 100 violations, from drugs, weapons, phones being found, hidden in his cell. Charlie didn't care. Really, what did he have to lose in the long run? As Charlie enters the mid-1980s, he's already had dozens of tape recordings and video interviews, just toying with interviewers, not giving them any firm answers of what he's being asked about from the murders years ago, not giving any real detailed information about the other person. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't, the people that were involved. When Charlie is asked about the women specifically and trialed with him, it seems that Susan Atkins comes up more than not as one of the main ones, mostly because of Susan's personality at the time of being arrested, and Susan's own story in the murders, seeming to be one of the main henchmen. She seemed to be one of Charlie's main girls and the leader of the women that helped in the murders that shocked the world. But years later, finds her own moment again in the spotlight as she becomes a born-again Christian, writing books, saying she didn't help in the murders, and that she made up most of it just so she would please Charlie at the time. Of course, this would bring many questions to Charlie in the beginning and later on in the 80s when Susan repented. She was looking for forgiveness from the courts and people, but never finds it and dies of brain cancer in prison. Charlie still never gives anything to interviewers about it. In 1984, Charlie would have his first big altercation. It seemed that every time the world forgot about Charlie, something would happen that put him right back in the spotlight for new generations to learn of the history of Charles Manson. On a normal day in prison, Charlie would be attacked by another inmate who despised him. The inmate was able to get their hands on paint thinner out of the wood shop and a lighter. The aggressor would throw paint thinner onto Charlie, most of it hitting his face and onto his clothes, and then Charlie's attacker would light him on fire. Charlie's face was severely burnt, his upper torso, his hands. He spent a good deal of time in the infirmary. He somehow comes out of it, not too scarred up. It was a close call for Charlie. There's a big passion that Charlie has that many people don't know about, mostly because Charlie's so wrapped up in the murders he's connected to. But before Charlie was arrested for the murders he was connected to, Charlie was a songwriter before and during his time as a cult leader. Believe it or not, even to this day, Charlie has many fans of his art and songwriting ability. You may not even know it, but many of his songs you've heard in movies and just in pop culture. When Charlie was young and coming up, lingering around young Hollywood, he was bumping shoulders with many different songwriters. At one moment, even running into Neil Young, hanging around this scene of artists, introduced Charlie to many of his followers. He was known as a songwriter. He was known in the 60s in the underbelly of musicians, but also would soon start to have a label around him as someone that you don't mess with. After having problems with Dennis Wilson from the Beach Boys, Dennis took Charlie under his wing at first and tried to introduce him to people around town to help Charlie out. But after the two ran into musical problems with one another, Charlie threatens Dennis with a bullet. By the time Charlie starts writing and able to record music again, it's in the 1980s on a handheld tape recorder. Even to this day, many don't have a solid date as when Charlie recorded his album, or just compilation of songs really, while he was in prison, how he found alone time and privacy to play and record the songs, and how long it took him. But nonetheless, The songs are there to listen to this day, and every once in a while are recorded by major artists. Charlie's music career has a deep valley of stories and people that are all connected with Charlie. It's a story very well of its own, of Charlie's music background. As the 90s roll into Charlie's life, he's becoming an older man now. In September of 1994, Charlie's on the front of Spin magazine. He says he's flattered, and once again, Charlie and his story is tossed back in the public, and with it, it brings interviews and more time for Charlie to talk to the public. In the later 90s, Charlie had been moved around several times from different prisons in California. Every time he did something naughty, and it would continue. In 1997, Charlie is found to be trafficking drugs into prison, helping him make his way with food, luxury items, and just once again, control. Charlie doesn't care, and to stop the trafficking, he's moved to another prison. As Charlie enters the new millennium, he somewhat goes silent for a moment, and the world seems to get away from Charlie, especially as America finds itself in a war and under attack from terrorists. Charlie is an old man now, and believe it or not, still trying to walk out of prison and plead his innocence. By the end of his life, he had been denied parole 12 times. In the mid-2000s, people start to come out of the woodwork saying that Charlie is their father, sons in particular. In 1993, one of Charlie's real sons took his own life. This is Charlie's first son from his first marriage. In 1955, the marriage did not last long due to Charlie misbehaving. There's still not much that is known about this son today, other than he hated Charlie and was ashamed about his father. There are a few people that have been proven to be Charlie's children that are still alive today. It's well known and documented from people that came out of the cult. While Charlie was living on Spawn Ranch with his followers, he had first pick of any woman he wanted. So in that, it's believed that Charlie has many offspring that have never been identified, maybe some still alive today, and maybe some that don't even know that Charles Manson is their father or grandfather. By the end of Charlie's life, one last particular thing happens. Charlie finds love, or what he thinks to be love. Charlie has been seeing a young lady that said she was born to love Charlie. The two were dating and seeing one another as much as they could as Charlie is locked up. They first fell into contact with one another when Miss Burton became aware of Charlie's love of environmentalism. Miss Burton became so close to Charlie that she even started to help him run his website for Charlie to still stay connected to the outside world. The public becomes aware of this, and for the last time, Charlie has his moment in the sun. The public is consumed by the story that Charles Manson has found love late into his life in prison. Charlie and his lovely new lady, side by side, are now talking about marriage, rings, and spending what time Charlie has together forever. But Burton would keep bringing up the conversation of Charlie's last breath, along with marriage, but also wanting Charlie to sign a piece of paper giving her full ownership of Charlie's body when he passes away. She brings it up so much that Charlie, who is a master himself of reading people and scheming, sees that he's being used for a plan, and Charlie wants nothing to do with it. Burton, along with a friend, will say later on that she had a plan to take possession of Charlie's body after he had deceased, bring it back home with her, preserving it, then putting it in a glass coffin and charging people that want to see Charlie in death. Charlie lets it go on for quite some time before he reveals his cards, simply because he's still receiving items for Burton, toiletries, snacks. Eventually, it all ends. In 2017, early into the year, Charlie fell ill, not feeling well, and in severe pain. As doctors run their tests on him, trying to find the problem, they quickly find out that Charlie has internal bleeding, and the culprit is colon cancer. By November 19th, 2017, Charlie has been on a bed, waiting to die. And really, it's that simple. He dies an old man that lived 3/4 of his life in prison. It's not a glorious death, or one that makes a good ending to a movie. It's just lonely. When Charlie dies on that day, the public finds out and the media makes it out to be more than really what it is, looking for a huge story with a Manson headline. The fight for Charlie's body does come up, his former girlfriend still trying to take ownership of Charlie's body. She's unable to do so, but one person would be able to have Charlie's remains. It was a grandson of Charlie himself. The younger man that's been proven to be Charlie's grandson takes custody of his grandfather's remains. He gives Charlie a funeral with 20 people attending. Charlie's seen one last time in a coffin, and from there, he was cremated. That's it. One man that made such a mess so many years ago, destroying lives from death or imprisonment, but never pulling a trigger himself. Charles Manson, dead at 83.